It's okay. It's okay.
Oh, I'm on. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sankofa Video, Books, and Cafe, where the laughs never stop, okay? We have been here since 1997, serving this community, serving the illustrious Howard University, HU.
Yeah.
I know that's right. Happy first day of class, HU. A lot of us here are Howard alum, myself included, so, you know, it's great to have y'all back. Tonight, we have a very special event with a scholar that needs no introduction, but of course we're going to introduce him anyway. Baba Dr. Molefi Kete Asante. And Mama, go ahead. Thank you. And Mama Dr. Nada. Okay. Molefi Kete Asante has become the seminal theoretician of Afrocentric infusion into the curriculum, examining and advancing the agency-centered ideological position in the realm of education, culture, and science. Widely read and consulted, Dr. Asante and his books have inspired educators in the United States, South Africa, Nigeria, Canada, and Brazil. And I want to let y'all know this is his 100th book. That's amazing. Dr. Nada is an assistant professor in the Department of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University. She spent her formative years in Ghana and Nigeria, was raised in the United Kingdom, and has worked in Sierra Leone and Ghana. Based on her research, she wrote the seminal book, African Mothers, Bearers of Culture, Makers of Social Change. The scholarship in here tonight, good God. It's a little overwhelming, so y'all, I will let you take the stage and please present us being human beings.
Wow.
Thank you.
So out of deference to the person who has two books here, I'm going to ask Dr. Delvin to start us off. We do. That's right. That's right. But it's okay.
Well, first of all, welcome, and I just want to say how honored I am to be in your company and to be invited to this book signing, and also honored to work with Dr. Asante in the Department of Africology, where I always wanted to be years and years ago. I've worked there years and years ago, and now I'm back again as an elder, so it's a wonderful privilege. We talked about this book, bringing ideas together, and it's really based on the work of Dr. Asante. It's Africological, because we're Africologists, but it's based on the idea of the significance of culture, because often culture is missed in the kind of analysis of what is going on with us while we're here and what's happening and so on. And so we really wanted to focus on cultural distinctions as the major difference among human beings, and to also start from Africa, the birthplace of humanity, and to look at culture and the changes that have been made in the way people think about things and behave and act in the world. And so that's really very foundational to the meaning of the book. And we've tried to use, to understand the construction of race as cultural and not genetic, because the genetic thing, as we know, most of us, is not true, it's a falsehood. But based on that falsehood, hundreds of millions of us have been murdered. So the ramifications of living and believing in a lie are death, really, in this case. And so we wanted to look at, well, these are inhuman acts. How can we say they're inhuman when they're activated every day as norms? And so we wanted to say, well, culturally, if we go back to Africa, we've got the evidence of many of the accomplishments of the African scientists and so on, going back 40,000 years, even before Kemet, which is a central idea in terms of classical Africa, where we would say, before conquest, we thought this way. So we brought in Ma'at as the standard of what it is to be human, so that if one practices Ma'at, then one is trying to be human, and that the further away that we get from that, the less human we are in our behaviour. And we recognise that Ma'at existed thousands of years before it was codified in Kemet. And so that's just a beginning, and of course the cultural distinctions are based on the debasement of the African woman and the African man, but ultimately the African woman, which has created the imbalance in the way that we act and think and behave. And, and in this racialized hierarchy, this falsehood, this patriarchy, we say that patriarchy and race cannot be separated, they work together. And in doing that, we've looked at religions to trace how the idea of race manifested before it became modern pseudo-scientific work. And, so we've found them in the holy books, which have justified the debasement of the woman, the debasement of the African man, and the following enslavement of African people. All of them have done that. So we looked to that as the source of the thinking that wanted to prove this genetically. So that's kind of the foundation. Would you say, Dr. Asante?
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Dove. Let me first of all say that we're really grateful for you coming. We're very happy to be here. And I want to personally thank Brother Holly and Jarima. And I know people have been talking about how great the moments have been at these different sites of education. But in the 1960s, there may have been a few, but not many greater sites of Black cultural thinking and Pan-Africanism than what we had at UCLA. And Hallie and I, along with Weston Van Horn and many of the filmmakers, people like Houston Baker, the literary professor, many of us were students at that time. So I'm really happy, Hallie, to see you and to recognize you as my brother. Whom I've always called the greatest Black filmmaker, one of the greatest filmmakers of all times. I mean, when I first saw his film, Sankofa, and I've seen others of his films and other films by people, I was truly amazed at the brilliance, the Afrocentric understanding that he put into that work. There has never been anything, in my judgment, to top it at this point. So I want to say this is a sacred space, to be in a space and a place where someone with such significance historically happens to be. It is a historical moment because each moment is history. And by us being in his presence, we also become a part of that sacred scene. I also want to thank Kemet, certainly because everything starts with Kemet. A lot of times people talk about what fraternity or sorority they're with. I'm a member of Kemet, and I just want to let people know that. Sometimes I don't mention it, but I should. I should, because I see all the alphas and omegas put their stuff out there. I should put down Kemet. Molefi, Kete, Asante, Kemet. So I just want y'all to know that's, I made my crossing during the COVID period. So I'm really, really delighted to see some of the Kemet brothers here. I also want to give special thanks to Sister Ayo and Brother Sam. Brother Sam, to Sister Ayo for organizing this event for us here at Sankofa. There are many things when I come here I want to say, but I'm going to start at the beginning like Dr. Nadav did and say to you that being human being, forming the race discourse was for us a book that would break the chain of slavery around our own minds as well as the chain of slavery in the society. No Homo sapiens existed before Africans. All Homo sapiens, the 8 billion people on the face of the earth, are descendants from those first Africans on the African continent. There are no other humans. We're the only humans. We started the whole thing. We are at the very beginning. So the question of being human being was to take back the narrative that had been presented out there where it seemed like what African people were always trying to do was to show we're human, or we are this, or we can come. No, we were the beginning. We're the foundation. There are no humans in terms of culture that are older than African culture and older than African people. What Europe did, and before Europe, as Dr. Dove pointed out, in the Rig Veda, the Hindu book, where they create the Varnas, the caste system, based on race, or color, I should say, based on complexion. And also in the Bible, the sons of Noah, Ham, and Ham was sort of out there. Also in Islam, sometimes people say, well, there was Bilal. But he was a servant. Because the religion itself incorporates this notion of the negativity of Africans. All the religions do that. Except our own religion. But we run away from that. We run as far away from Yoruba and Zulu as we can. Akan, you just run away from it. You see? So the notion that there are these differences, that's not the big problem. The big problem is not difference. And we've made that argument in the book. That difference, you can look at people and see difference. I can look at this audience and see differences. Difference exists. Africans always knew that difference existed. But what Africans did not do, which Europe did, was to rank difference. They ranked it. Now you can always rank difference. You can look at things and say, this one is superior to this one. This one is inferior because of this or that or the other. And what Europe did, and not only Europe, but other people, what they did was to not only rank these differences as superior and inferior, but to put the inferiority on African people. We knew historically, Africans did, that some people were tall and some were short. Some people were lighter complexion than others. But we did not put rankings on these differences. Europe did that. 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, they began to make these statements and arguments, buttress them with religion, with philosophy, with insane statements, sort of a Trumpist notion of white privilege. All this was a construction. But as Dr. Dove said, it's not real. It's not real. But what happens is that if people say it long enough and hard enough, you walk around thinking it's real. You got some black people think it's real. Man, we ain't nothing. Why you ain't nothing? Who said you were not anything? I walk around and when I look at black people, I say there's a nobility there. When I met Dr. Ayo Sakai, I said, there's nobility in this person. She's enthusiastic, she's directed, she wants to do her work. Her advisor, Taiwo, a good friend of mine, was eager to see her through her PhD program and also into publishing. This is because that's who we are. And for me tonight to be here and to see people coming from Philadelphia to also be here, Brother Sam in New York, Brother Checkwas. This is a wonderful thing because he's also one of the good, strong, solid brothers who's doing this work as well. To be here in this situation. Let me tell you a story. I won't be long, and then I'll turn it back to Dr. Dove, and then we'll go back, and then there'll be questions and answers. So, I happen to be in Savannah, Georgia. I was born in Valdosta, Georgia. But my ancestry, according to the DNA that I did through AfricanAncestry.com, is Yoruba and Mahasi. Yoruba from Nigeria, Mahasi from Sudan. So interestingly, what happened to me was that once I began, this was like in 2004, 2007, when I discovered this, and I started writing and reading, I was also interested in, how we got here. And when we got here, what happened to us? And the thing that struck me was, and I've said it often, and you've heard it before, that we were taken off of our own terms. We were taken out of our continent, number one. And when you're taken out of your continent physically, that means that you are somewhere else where you were not before. You were somewhere where your ancestors are not even buried. Their ashes are not even on the ground in those places. You own the ancestral land right here in Washington, D.C., of the indigenous people of this land. This was where their ancestors were, you see. So we moved off of our physical terms, but by being moved off of our physical terms, we were also moved off of our mental terms and our psychological terms, our spiritual terms, our philosophical terms, our cultural terms. Everything we knew, we were moved off of it. And so what has happened to us is a very, very tragic situation. And that is, and we know this, but we just never had any therapy for it. The tragedy is that we were taken off of our terms, but no one, after 246 years of being imprisoned in the American slave system and then being freed in this country, nobody said to us, now you need a debriefing. You've been 246 years in this situation. Let me tell you what happened to you, and let me tell you how you can get back to where you need to be. And nobody's ever done that. We never had that to happen to us. But people these days, any little tragedy happen, they say we gotta just close the school down and debrief the kids and run them through therapy. But you got millions of black people, not just in the United States. I just came from Brazil. In Brazil, you got 100 million black people. We never had therapy. So we don't have therapy. We're dislocated, dislodged from our sensibilities that were historic and for thousands of years. This creates craziness. People say, why are we like we are? It's simple. We're dislocated. We're out of place. We are not people who are fighting out of a sense of our own assertion, our own agency, who we are. And we lost the edge that we had. Even, I'm sorry, I'm a child of the 60s. I can't help but say that the 60s were the greatest period in this country. I'm a child of the 60s. That's when we knew we had them. All we had to do was just push them over the cliff. We were just there, almost there, you see. So I have a sense that what we've got to do is respark this. We've got to understand Pan-Africanism. And this is what I love about Haile Gerima. He's a first Pan-Africanist. He's not just an African-American filmmaker or an Ethiopian filmmaker. He's a Pan-Africanist. He's clear in his philosophy. He loves African people and African culture. Those are the people we need. We don't just need people to say, well, I'm working in the school district and I'm working for this African American community. No, there are all kinds of people in the black community. And they're from everywhere. So you have to have a Pan-African vision. Afrocentricity is a Pan-African vision. Being human being, transforming the race discourse is a Pan-African vision. It's a wide vision. And it says, we take the ground of humanity. And we take that first before anybody else. We talk about mod, yes. But we took that first. We don't let anybody else come and assert that. If you look at the history, you'll understand this. So let me tell you the story in Savannah, then I will turn it back. I learned this when I was in Savannah about a month ago. Because my home, Valdosta, is about 120 miles, and I stopped in Savannah before I went to my family reunion. So I stopped in Savannah, and I go to this church, the first African church. You've been there in Savannah. I went there, and I listened to the stories, and there was a story that I read in one of their brochures that I had never heard before. And it is true, I've studied so many things, and I've read so many things. I've written African American history. But when General Sherman was marching his army from Atlanta to Savannah, this is during the Civil War, when they named the American tank after him, the Sherman tank. It was named after him because what he did, everything he saw in Georgia that was standing for the conservative Republicans, but everything he saw standing for the races, he tore down. It was barns for animals, houses, factories. He just went through and he told his soldiers, kill everything and destroy everything. When they got to Savannah, by the time they got to Savannah, there were so many black people who were trailing behind the Union Army. There were like thousands of them because people had been liberated from plantations. They were no longer enslaved, so they just said, we're going to follow these Union soldiers. We're going to go as far as they go. Wherever they go, we go out with them, right? So we were just going with them. They get to a place called the Ebenezer Creek. When they get to Ebenezer Creek, the Sherman's army had to figure out how do you cross a creek, which was like a river. It was 110 yards across. How do you cross this stream with all these soldiers and all these people trailing behind them? So he decided that what they would do, they would get the soldiers across, the Union soldiers, but they would use the black men who have been trailing with them to help them build pontoon bridges. These are low bridges across the water so that the soldiers can get through. And once the soldiers got across, they heard that the Confederate army was coming, and they were very close, and they wanted to ensure that the Confederates would not be able to cross the river. So they took up the pontoon bridges and left thousands of black people who had been trailing them, men and women, on the shore, trying to figure out how to cross the river without the bridge. This is what I learned. 5,000 black people died trying to cross Ebenezer Creek. One of the greatest tragedies in the history of African American life. Now, I'd never heard of that before. They decided that they would walk across, but the river was too high. And many women and children, mostly women and children, died. And I'm saying to myself, I'm one of the people banned in Florida by DeSantis. And this fool doesn't want us to teach this history. What is wrong with him? And this is why we have to determine ourselves in meetings like this at Sankofa and other sites. We will teach our story to our children. We will tell our story. We'll assert our agency. And the assertion of our agency has to be strong. You cannot allow any racism, any thought of inferiority of black people, the degradation of women. You can't allow any of that to happen in your presence. You have to confront it, encounter it, fight it. That's what we have to do. I have many more things to say, but I don't want to be a patriarch here.
Going back to the book, and really that is a part of the book still, because there's a lot of the history of racism and its impact on African American communities, and the different types of catastrophes that were caused by believing in the falsehood. And so that is a very important part of the book. So we give examples. So we've tried to include the lands of the First Nations people and recognize that when you're looking at culture, when you're understanding that African people left the continent and populated the whole world, then it makes sense when we talk about indigenous people who are still existing in different parts of the world, who are phenotypically different from the archetypal African image phenotype that we're used to, but they still practice African ways of existing and being, African values and beliefs, female-male reciprocity and balance, justice, truth. All those martic things exist today among many indigenous people because they've maintained some of those African ways of being, but they don't actually look African phenotypically. So culture really is very inclusive and embraces people who are quite often removed from the history of humanity as it is today, or have been, along with the African character, debased, and their continuing removal, land clearance that's going on across the world is the removal of people who, have the cultural ways that are a weakness in many ways. The idea of truth, the idea of justice, all of that seems to be a weakness because people are not prepared for the onslaught and horror that the opposing culture has created and imposed upon us. So now we're trying to look at the mind and say that the mind really is the battlefield. So if there are some who say, that we've written this book to kind of say that race doesn't exist, and then we've turned European or white or whatever. And the point is to say that in the mind, if one knows truth, then one can think differently about how to operate in the world. And the difference is something that we may not, I certainly may not see in my lifetime, but this difference in mindset leads people to think about solving problems in different ways, because that's why we're talking about dismantling, because it creates new ideas. There are people who feel safe inside the existing construct, which was created by people who hated African people. So it's quite sad, really, to think that we're participating in maintaining something that is only destroying us, and particularly the darkest skinned people. So even amongst ourselves, we've got hierarchies that are related to the ideas of race, where we can look at ourselves in the same way as the constructors, the dominators have imposed these ideas upon us. So, when we say culture, we're trying to not take the European idea of culture, which is racialized, so that culture is in a hierarchy of superiority and inferiority. We use the Jobian idea, the authentic anthropologist he was, to say the truth, that there was one original culture that we all had, and we've moved away from it in different ways. All it was the woman and man producing life and culture. That's the beginning. And how it changed was, over time we had the male domination, which was the first injustice and the first imbalance and the first way of loving hierarchy, feeling superior, feeling powerful, and leading to the hierarchy of humanity. So we use that as the foundation of the development of race as we understand it today, that it came from the mindset of people who loved hierarchy and loved their own greatness and despised in time those that they lived off and benefited from, which is what we see today, because we live in a patriarchy, a racist patriarchy. So, the darkest skinned black woman we know is at the bottom of this hierarchy. And so her place, has to be given back to her in our minds for the change to occur. So we have our own. Is that okay, Dr. Asante?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We had a situation, you may have heard of it. This was, thank you, Jada Pinkett Smith did the film, sponsored the film Cleopatra, and on Netflix. And the Arabs in Egypt went crazy because the characterization of this of Cleopatra was an African woman from Britain, and it was very clear to us just watching this that the investment in the notion of race as color is so deeply entrenched in the white imagination that they could not even imagine how could she, Jada Pinkett, really allow this to happen? That Cleopatra is a black woman. And of course, there were some black people who had the same question. And that shows you the ignorance. And that shows you also the racism. And it shows you also how the race paradigm can be used. The race paradigm is the most dangerous paradigm that has ever been unleashed against African people. And for the last 500 years, it started earlier than the 500 years, but for the last 500 years, it's crazy. So much so that if you accept all of its assumptions, you would even say that Clarence Thomas is okay because he's black. You can't do that. Our argument has been you can't do that. You got to look at culture. Is this culture truly Ma'ani? Is he truly based on a Pan-African vision of the world? Does he understand relationship of one human to another? All these things are fundamental. You got to interrogate it. You just can't assume that because he's black that he's going to be okay. You can't do that. It would be great if you could do it, but you can't do it. If you do it, you messed up. You find that, oh no. I mean, look, I work at an institution that's predominantly white. We got black people working in that institution. I can't. I would be a fool to assume that those black people, are looking and saying, okay, because we're black, we have no. Our cultures are different. That's what we work toward. How do we create this sense of the fundamental African values that were grounded very first in the thinking and the thought processes of the sages who lived and died thinking for thousands of years? How do we exist? We haven't been here more than 300,000 years as Homo sapiens. But the earth has been here 5 billion years. So there were microbes long before us who occupied this earth. And when the dinosaurs were here 70 million years ago, there were no humans here. We didn't coexist with the dinosaurs. They left before we even got here. And they lived on the earth for 75 million years. We've only lived on the earth for 300,000 years as Homo sapiens. So we got a lot to learn, but we learned a lot already before we left the continent of Africa. And we didn't all leave the continent of Africa. Sometimes people say, when humanity left Africa, wait a minute, there are humans in Africa now. You can't say that. We always been here, and we're all over the world globally. Australia would have been the second black continent in the world had there not been an invasion of Europeans. The Australian, indigenous people. There are many places in the world like that would have remained as the indigenous people, you see. So anyway, so we are You know, we can answer any question that you may have that you want to say, but there's much to talk about. But we really are here for you to buy the book. I'm not. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. Let me just tell y'all this, and please, I'm gonna say this from the bottom of my heart because I love you. There's nobody more noble than Black people, as African people, in the sense that our culture is a culture of great nobility. We've been through many things, and we always say we're resilient. Well, we're resilient, but it's because of our sense of nobility. But what I want us to do is also to support each other's businesses. That's what I want us to do. I don't like being a beggar, and I don't like us being beggar people. We don't have to ask anybody for anything. We got it. Y'all buy these books, okay? Y'all help out Sankofa. Y'all support our publishers. Do that. There are at least 40 million Africans in the United States of America. If 1 million of them bought Dr. Asante's book, I could then walk around and say I'm rich. You know what I'm saying? But the Jews can do it. I just can't. They've done it. They're always on the New York Times bestseller. But it's hard for us to do that. Just give your children a gift of a book. They'll appreciate you 20 years from now. You don't have to go out and find the most recent gadget. Just show them who we are and what we can be. That's what I want to do.
I'd just like to add to that really the books here are books that wouldn't be published by any
That's right.
straightforward publishers. And so, you know, IO has really taken a gamble and a risk to trust the work, particularly for me. Obviously, you know, with Dr. Asante, you want to win. But the point is that the things that are inside these books are not the Pan-European Academy. And so all these publishers, they just won't publish it. And so, you know, we have so much to thank for IO for just being very brave. It's true. Absolutely true. So I just wanted to add to that.
Can you tell them about Afrocentric School?
Oh, yes. This book is based on research that was done in Ghana in the early 2000s, and it's really I was working for UNICEF at that time, but from an Afrocentric perspective. Because UNICEF, as you know, tries to destroy all the African institutions that exist and impose their own Western ideas on it. But somehow my line manager believed in me and gave me the position of being the chief, a senior advisor to a baseline study. And the baseline study took training from an Afrocentric perspective as to what we were looking for. And we were, instead of debasing the rural children that we were going to look at them as people who have knowledge that we would like to understand so that we could be better people. So the institutions that existed, we wanted to enhance the possibility of using them and developing them rather than crushing them. And so about 1,200 parents of many children, 800 being mothers, were asked to give their understanding of what their children were learning and their skills development from before they were born until they were about 10 years old, and from then an extrapolation was made to say, okay, by the time they're 15, this is what they do. And so that is the research. So instead of doing like the Swiss guy, Piaget, used his 5 children as the example that the world uses to judge what children should be doing today. And we're all doing this every day in our schools across the world. And so this is a sort of unique work because it tries to respect the parents and the children and the environment, recognizing the colonization that's going on and the land clearance and all that, but giving respect to people who are surviving in that and maintaining ancient African values in terms of their cosmogonies and understanding ecosystems and so on. So it then was transferred into what urban African children here would be doing at that age if they had the wherewithal to be able to do it. So there were assumptions made that it's possible that urban children here, African children here, would be doing the same things, only they're literate. They're learning literacy that doesn't necessarily help them in any way. So this book is just to come from the Afrocentric perspective it uses. It's just about truth, really, what's happened in that is age appropriate. And so it starts 3 to 5, but it's got data from before birth. And it just gives lesson plans in a theoretical context, which is what we've been talking about, you know, the Afrocentric model. So it was an Afrocentric it's all Afrocentric, that's the easiest thing to say.
Okay, and revolutionary pedagogy, this other book that you can see, this revolutionary pedagogy was really written because I was so fed up with schools, and actually had just had a situation in Pittsburgh where I was a consultant for the Pittsburgh School District, and they had hired me to train teachers, and had done it for a year or two, and then they hired a brother, in quotes, who had been a football player to be the school superintendent, coming from Florida. And the first thing he did was to say, we don't need any cultural training. We need to get rid of all this Afrocentric stuff and so on, and they shut down the program. And so that's also what spurred me to think that you just can't depend on people because of, you know, they say they're black. You get that? No, they can be quite dumb and ignorant and anti-African. And this basically was the way this guy who was superintendent in Pittsburgh was. I saw him that way. In fact, the previous superintendent had been a white person. So that's what was so crazy, you know. So, but at any rate, so I, you know, I mean, sometimes things spark you. So I wrote Revolutionary Pedagogy because the going pedagogy for what they call urban schools, contemporary schools, was based on critical race theory. And critical race theory is useful. There's some very excellent aspects of critical race theory, and I talk about them in the book. But critical, whenever you hear the word critical, just in terms of ordinary people, you have to understand what it refers to. It actually comes out of the Marxist tradition. That's what, whenever you hear critical something, You just think Marxist, and then you'll be close. So, and that's fine. It's useful. There's some very useful analysis that are critical. But my thing was, no, it has to go beyond just the question of social justice. We can't just talk about it, because the critical race theorists want to tell us about social justice. And I back in my younger days, I used to debate Cornel West quite often. We debated about 4 times or 5 times. It was very, very interesting always, because as a social democrat, his whole idea was, that we have to talk about social justice. But my thing is that the root of the problem is, as Dr. Nadal claimed, and as we claim in our book, Being Human Being, the root of the problem is cultural. We don't have, black people don't like Africa. Let me say it again. Black Americans have a problem with Africa. Everywhere I go, that's what I see. It's just like it was in Malcolm's day. When Malcolm, you remember what Malcolm said? Black people say, I ain't left nothing in Africa. And he said, you left your mind in Africa. This is what I see, right? So my thing is that how do we break through this wall? So we began to understand our origins and to honor our ancestors. This is not a religious thing with me. It's simply about how do you create an organic heritage for your children? How do you make it possible for them to survive in a world where they're competing with other people who have a strong interest in their own heritage and ancestry? And you set your children out in the world to be eaten by the dogs of all other cultures. Something's wrong with that picture. You can't do that. You have no right to do that. Your right, your love for our children, for their sake, is to give them a platform, a foundation. And our foundation is older, stronger, more correct for us. There's nothing more correct for you than your own historical experiences. Nothing. Nobody's historical experiences are better than yours. Whose ancestors are better than mine?
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
No, we can do this. It's not hard. We can do this. It's will. That's what you have to will. You wake up, I wake up every day and I say, this is a good day to fight.
Right.
Every day has to be like that. Because if we don't wake up like that, we will lose. Anyway, that's what the revolutionary party is. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Hello. My name is Cherno Gay. So I'm here on a fellowship for young African leaders. It's called the Young African Leaders Initiative. And I'm one of the fellows benefiting from this. Every year, the United States Department picks 700 of the most influential young Africans from all over Africa and bring them here for a 6-week leadership training in different universities. And out of the 700, they pick 100 to stay to do a 4 weeks internship in a US organization. And I'm one of the people doing the internship. Well, this conversation is very important to me because we are interrogating similar questions back home. And for me, the question has been about what you're talking about on the issue of what our position has been as a race recently. And so I have a question and a few observations, and that is, one of the question is, to what extent have we contributed to the, into perpetuating us as an inferior race as Black people? How much did we contribute to that? How complicit are we in this act? Because I'm from Africa. I'm not from here. I'm here like for 10 weeks, and I'm going back home. And I'm a young leader. I'm a community organizer back home. I was at MSU East Lansing, and so we went to meet some of the leaders, and we went to meet the mayor of Lansing, and the city is very clean, so clean. So I was like, this place is really nice. It was like, it's actually going to be better because we're building a battery plant to make batteries for electric cars. And I was like, where is the lithium coming from? And he laughed, right? Because more than 60% of all the lithium in the world comes from Africa. And we don't have a single factory building electric cars. Every household you go to is flat screen TVs, is computers, is mobile phones, and you can't make a screen without coltan. Have more than 60% of all the coltan in the world comes from Africa. We don't make any of that. They use the same mineral to make airplane engines. We don't make a single airplane in Africa. And so you're talking about not being able to sell your books. It's not because you don't have black people who can do that. The question becomes, how organized are we? I also have a very big concern regarding the connection between African Americans in the West and Africa itself. A lot of African Americans have been going back recently to Africa, but it is not very intentional. It is not very organized. It's individuals trying to find their roots. There's no form of organized action to do that, right? Most of the resources we export to the West doesn't benefit black people in the West. It doesn't in any single way. Right now, recently we had a coup in Niger, and you know who is defending Niger because ECOWAS want to go there and restore peace? It's a mercenary military owned by the Russians. What are the Russians doing defending Niger? What interest do they have that warrants them to hold guns and defend their country? What are they fighting for? They're not fighting for the freedom of the black man. They're not fighting for the advancement of the black man. So I guess my question is, to what extent have we contributed to all of this? Because I have read a lot about slavery, and no white man ever went to the African villages and cut slaves. It was black people catching black slaves, going to the coast and selling them to white people, negotiating prices of their own brothers. And it is the same thing happening to this day. It is our leaders back in Africa taking our resources, shipping them, giving them off to white people at prices that don't make sense at all. And then the West will take those raw materials, build them into things, send them back to us, and we can't even afford them. So it's slavery in a different way. So how much have we contributed to all of this?
This is why we focus on culture, because the colonization of Africa is about the cultural imposition of anti-African ways of thinking and being. And the thing we're taking the position that culture, we know this to be true, influences the development of all institutions. All institutions are culturally influenced and shaped. And so the institutions that are being put across Africa are not African institutions. Those are the ones that are being destroyed. But mentally, if we actually don't know our own history and what we have already accomplished, which is far beyond where we are today, it's a purposeful thing, because what comes along with culture is the teaching of information that will prevent critical thinking and understanding that there is a history. There is a cultural history, and so the colonization is what we have in Africa and what we have here. We're having a cultural imposition of information, not knowledge, information. If there is knowledge, it's knowledge about the people who are doing this, and we are being trained every day to be them, without any power, because the power is that we're black, and so there's a justification for that in these anti-African ideas. So you're really describing the impact of anti-black people in Africa, training African people to be anti-black, to be anti-African, and because we're all black, we're all saying there's no racism here. But there is, because it's a global racism which has been imposed in our minds to look like there's no culture, there's only one universal culture for humanity. And so we're trapped into building the colonizer's world for him. This is what we're always doing. We're building everything in the image, and institutions support that. You can look at, say, healthcare in Africa and here, and see how many mothers die in childbirth, how many children die, all these things, because the institutions are not for African people to prosper and do well. There's a sort of genocidal component to all this, while you've got children with coltan, you know, who are being killed before they even get back with their rods. And, you know, that's acceptable. It's in Africa and yet it's acceptable, but that's because our minds are in Europe and in the Islamic world and Christian world. We're taken up by these ideas, you know. I'm sorry, that's it.
That's good. Thank you for, wow, this has got real hot now. I mean, this brother, and brother, I appreciate you. You on that, you on the program that Obama set up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've spoken. Every year they come to Philadelphia and I speak to them. When they send 20 or 25 of you guys come to Philadelphia, and they always have me come down and speak to you. And I'm happy to speak with you because there are a couple of things that I want to add to what Dr. Dove has said regarding your questions and your comments. And one of them is the economic situation in the continent itself. Actually, the political and the economic situation. Political situation is that we don't have in Africa any common organization. I've been fighting for 40 years for a Pan-African, continental African state, but we don't have that. And it seems like more and more we're getting further away from that. And I'll come back to that in a minute. At the economic level, take, for example, I don't know which country you're from, but in South Africa, for example, when Thabo Mbeki and Mandela took government, and Mbeki was his first minister in South Africa, one of the things that was reported was that when they took over the government, that the government was so deeply indebted because the white apartheid government in South Africa had spent so much of the money and had borrowed so much money that by the time Mandela took over, all of the promises that the ANC, the African National Congress, had made to the masses of people, none of those promises could be met. We're going to give everybody a house. We're going to give everybody running water. We're going to give everybody electricity. Mbeki's observation was, when we looked at the budget and we looked at the money, there was no money. The white folk had spent all the money. So what that does to a nation is to immediately indebt the African leaders who take over power. This has happened throughout the continent. It happened in almost every country. It happened even with Algeria or the French. And then they took over the government and discovered, hey, wait a minute, you got international debts. And these international debts, because of the interest rates on the loans, are so great that you can't spend any money on education. You can't spend any money on health. You got to pay your debt. You see? So this is what has happened to every country in Africa. All the countries have the same problem. In the key situation with Niger, one of the things that occurred to me was that when Ibrahim Traore took over power in Niger, again, he's a young man with a Thomas Sankara spirit, brilliant, visionary, wanting to do something for the people. but you don't have an army that's worthwhile. So then he has to bring in the Wagner group, the Russians. Why must he bring in the Wagner group? Because the Americans have a base there. They have the largest drone base in the world in Niger. We do, the United States. The French have a base there. So he couldn't ask the French and he couldn't ask the Americans because they support Bazoum, the guy that was overthrown. So now he's forced to ask Wagner, and he doesn't have enough troops himself to defend himself against ECOWAS. So you got situations that are created economically that create pressures and tensions on these political leaders that they have to do certain kinds of things. Now, it's not necessarily moral or ethical what they do, but I'm just telling you that it's not as easy as it looks to say, okay, you can do this, you can do that. I remember in Senegal, when Abdoulaye Wade was president of Senegal, he had a situation where the French came in and said, okay, we will help you do such and such and such and such and create these mines, but we want more than 51%. He says, no, I'd rather keep it in the ground. But very few nations can say that. Very few presidents will say that. I would keep my uranium in. The reason everybody wants Niger or Niger is because it's uranium. The whole French economy is based on nuclear energy. They don't have hydroelectric energy. They have nuclear energy. Where do they get the uranium from? Niger. So now you got a situation where if Niger wants to make money to feed its people and to build its schools, it's going to have to play ball with somebody to sell that uranium. So it's it's not an easy problem. That's all I wanted to point out of that. Now there's another issue, and that is, be careful in the United States. You in the United States, right? Be careful in the United States or anywhere in the West when people give you their analysis of what the situation is. Even be careful of my own analysis, right? But be careful of analysis. It is not true historically that Africans sold Africans. Let me tell you what happened here. What happened here in the 1950s and 1960s is that everybody knew in the 1950s that the enslavement of African people was based on European greed. Everybody knew that. There was no issue. But then they integrated the schools. In my state of Georgia, they integrated the schools. Black children knew that white people and their ancestors had enslaved them, had captured them. The first capture of Africans and used Africans for slaves was when the Portuguese went to the Senegalese coast in 1444 and took 70 Africans to Lisbon. That's the historical fact. They ran into the villages and got black people and took them. There were no black people even had any sense of commercial anything like that, right? So that's the first thing in terms of Europeans. But what happened, and we need to know this, what happened with the white children in the South in this country is that they began to feel guilty sitting next to black kids. So to take the guilt off of the white children, the white textbook writers wrote it to put the guilt on black people.
That's right.
You can't go with that. There's nowhere everywhere in Africa. I wrote the book, The History of Africa. You can look at my book and read it. It's a deep study. Through over 300 different wars between Africans and Europeans during the enslavement period, where Africans were fighting to protect African people from enslavement. Even in Zinga, the great queen of Congo and Angola, spent 40 years waiting to attack the Portuguese because of their enslavement of her people. So this is what you have to honor. Don't honor that. Nowhere in Africa was slavery ever the principal mode for production of anything. You never had slavery as a principal mode for mining, for agriculture. You never had that in Africa. No slave. There's no slave economy. The only slave economy that maybe a little bit was Dahomey for about 100 years because of the Portuguese. You see? So that's the only, but nowhere else in Africa. Why? Because no African political, philosophical, spiritual system had any place for enslavement of people. Except for the Arabs. Now, that's right. That's a good point. And thank you, Dr. Still, you correct me correctly. Because that's right. And the Arabs did it before the Europeans. The Arabs brought in that. They also brought in patriarchy. The Arabs and the Christians brought in patriarchy. It's not an African system. Right. You go back 200, 300 years, it's not an African system. And with the Arabs brought in the enslavement of Africans, they did it from the 9th century. They conquered Egypt in the 7th century. They then conquered the rest of North Africa in the between the 7th and the 9th century, and then in the 9th and 10th century, they began to get to East Africa and West Africa, and conquering those places. And Timbuktu became the biggest slaver of all times, the Arab slaver in Zanzibar. So don't ever underestimate African people. African people have always been the most, in my judgment, have demonstrated great morality and great ethics when it came to relationships. So don't know what now, were there Africans who collaborated with Europeans and Arabs? Yeah. There are Africans right now in the United States who collaborate with Africans and Europeans. There are Africans who collaborate with anybody.
And that's the cultural piece. They're collaborating culturally, they're believing these people that they will benefit from this situation. And so they will betray their own people and believe in the belief and hate themselves and other African people because their minds have been captured by that anti-black African cultural belief. Yes. So this is why, I just want to say this is why we have Afrocentric theory, because the foundation of that is the love of Africa. And people who love Africa and look at the history and love the history and know these things are hated in this country and despised. Dr. Asante is one of our greatest Afrocentrists. He's the father of Afrocentricity. He's written 100 books, etc. He's travelled Africa hundreds of times. He's been everywhere. This man is totally disrespected, not only in the university, but in the department, and yet he has remained strong for all these years, helping people get doctorates that enable them to see the truth which has been hidden from us both here in the continent, in the Americas, in the Caribbean, everywhere in the world, in Australia, in Fiji, in Papua New Guinea, everywhere that we are, that history is hidden from us. And those of us who look at that history are a danger, because the battle is for the mind, because the mind is central to culture. The mind develops culture, culture develops the mind. That is the real enemy for those who want to maintain the ways that they practice. But once we start understanding the truth, then we can act in appropriate ways. Otherwise, we'll always rely on on others to tell us a truth which they're not going to do. Otherwise, we'll be free and we'll know different things. They're not going to do that ever.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we thank you.
Any more questions? We're gonna start back here and work our way up. Look.
Thank you. Dr. Asante, you mentioned being a child of the 60s. I too am a child of the 60s, and Dr. Dub, as you were saying, what's central is having that love. And over the decades, I've wondered, what was it that was going on in the 60s? I mean, I have my ideas, but it needs to be fleshed out, because I sometimes feel like what we've had since does not compare to what we were gifted with. I was just a child, but I didn't get it directly from my parents, though I didn't get like hate, but I just feel like I was in the right place at the right time, being a child of the 60s, and I have that love that can't be taken away. And here we are now in the 2020s, and we're looking, it's like we've regressed. Can we ever get back to that 60s period where there was that great love? Dr. W just mentioned, that the battle is for the mind. It's like we had our minds much more strongly so back then. What happened? How can we get back? And I do believe that it's cyclical. It's not just that we discovered or we were there in the 60s and it hadn't existed before nor since, but what can we say and or do to get back to that high? Anybody, please.
Thank you very much, brother. You've raised a very important question, and I think there are several things that we can do, and that we are doing. Number one, right now, this is the beginning. Right, this meeting here itself is like the 60s. This is where I feel. I feel like, wow, we got a group of people. We have a group of people we meet in Philadelphia. There are a group of people meeting in New York. There are people meeting in LA. There are people meeting in Rio and Salvador. It's coming back. But part of what we have to do is to have an ideological base, because what African people have never had is, if you ask them, what's our ideology? That's a big problem. We don't have, and that's why Afrocentricity stands if you're in Cuba, if you're Afro-Mexican, Afro-Colombian, Afro-Brazilian, if you're in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Zimbabwe, you can talk Afrocentric talk. That is the agency of Africa. I put Africa at the center of all my analysis. That gives us, for the first time, an ideological position that helps to drive Pan-Africanism. Because Pan-Africanism without Afrocentricity, in my discussion with Kwame Ture, we had this discussion at the University of Cincinnati before he passed away, was this point. It said, Pan-Africanism, is nothing but a slogan. How do you activate Pan-Africanism? You activate it by saying, let us act in the best interest of African people and the centrality of Africans in our own narrative, that we are subject people. We're not simply acted upon, and we will not be acted upon. We will ourselves do things. We will act in our own best interest. That's a fundamental way to move. If we do that, if every African operates in that way, then we have a common ideology based on the classical civilizations of Africa. The Nile Valley civilizations points us in a direction. I mean, you can't do better than Nubia and Kemet and Aksum. I mean, these are fundamental civilizations that are in the Nile Valley complex that were there before any other civilization. And that's where we began to take inspiration from. And if we do that and we move it into in a global sense, we're able to move in a very strong way. But we, of all people, because of the colonization of Africa and the enslavement of Africans, we have been factionalized in a way, so that you have, I mean, in my family, I always take my family as an example. My family, we got some Republicans, we got some Jehovah Witnesses, and some Baptists, and some different people who argue to the death their positions, but they don't argue for black people. So so that's the craziness. That's what I'm saying. That's why I call it. It's like we don't have an ideology that is African, because we're scared to interrogate Africa itself. For every question, you can interrogate Africa. What was the young man? The young man left. No, he stepped out because I wanted to say something to him, particularly about that whole question of condemning African leadership. Because when they came to Philadelphia, they were talking about how great America was, and these are Obama scholars, how great America was, and so on. I said, wait a minute, I live in the United States of America. Trump was the president. Don't tell me about the corruption and you don't know, because what they teach these young people from Africa, these leaders of Africa, they tell them, this is the great, and it's a great country. I don't want to have a problem with that. But don't tell people that your leaders are all corrupt. And that's what I had to tell them. The Obama scholars, they came to me, and one young brother from Uganda got up and talked about, well, Museveni is this and he's this, and he was right. But I said, wait a minute, Museveni is not I live in the heart of the beast. This is America. Trump has done far more than Museveni. So anyway, we just have to be very careful about how we speak of this.
Thank you so much. Before I take the next question, I would love to encourage you all to go get a book.
There you go.
Because they will be signing. So we're going to keep taking questions, but please get up and sign the book. And I just wanted to thank them also for being here. I was a graduate student at Howard University where I got my PhD. He was on my dissertation committee. My advisor, Dr. Darren Harris, who's the chair of the political science department, is here. Sankofa has been my home while I was doing my studies. And it was Dr. Asante who set me straight on this path to publish Black scholars from an Afrocentric and African-centered perspective. Thank you. When he met me as a graduate student in 2015, he knew there was a mission. I was publishing and doing universal right publication, but he understood that there was a mission that was needed to accomplish. And so Universal Right Publications is the only social science publishing company that publishes Black scholars from an African-centered and Afrocentric perspective. So I encourage you to follow us online, visit our website. You all have a catalog of all of our books coming out. Dr. Asante is the most published African-American scholar that we know of to date, and Universal Right Publications published 10 of his books. So please, thank you. So please buy our books, follow us, be part of the mission, and go get books. And I'm going to keep taking questions for Dr. Asante. Anyone else?
Dr. Asante, all of your work, I know has come with tremendous criticism from the enemy. And as a younger brother, and along with younger sisters, can you instruct us personally on how you deal with your not out of Africas and the people that has come up against us that really doesn't mean us any good and who try to miseducate us and have us suffer from internalized racism and all other kind of crazy stuff that you talked about. And I know you've been right there, in the midst of defending yourself and us. So give us instructions on how we can continue to defend you and the rest of Black people.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Gerard. Let me just say that one way, and I'm glad you mentioned Lefkowitz's book, Not Out of Africa. That book was highly publicized. Not only was it highly publicized, it was supported by white foundations who sent that book all over the country. They did a couple of books like that. They had a book by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. like that. And the foundations, the white think tanks, just bought thousands of copies and sent it to all the thought leaders of America. So people were reading books that were anti-African, and we didn't even know that they were doing it. I mean, so you would walk into the executive offices of some bank official, and there's Mary Lefkowitz's book, Not Out of Africa. They were so happy about this is exposing the falsehood of Afrocentricity. Well, the thing is, I debated her twice. And the last time was here in Washington at the Smithsonian. And before the debate started, she got up and told the audience, Molefi, we know that philosophy started in Egypt. And then, so it's sort of to cut me off in terms of my argument. So I got up and said, Mary, if you knew that, why would you have written the book Not Out of Africa? So what we have to do, which I think is extremely important, we have to keep studying and we have to keep writing and we have to write more. When I was a graduate student with Hallie Jerome, and he knows the Bunch building at UCLA, right next to it was a graduate library. You could go in there. At that time, it was 24 hours. The library was open at the university 24 hours. You can go anytime and study. And I would go in there, and I would go to the E section of the Dewey section thing. And that E section is where all the Black books were. And that's all the books that they have written against us were right in that E section. All books about savage Ethiopia, the Hottentot this, and all those books is in the E section of the Dewey. If you go to the library, they still got the Dewey Decimal System. You go to E, and the E section gives you all the books. And I said, we have got to write so many books to overcome the negativity that they have to do. So we got to keep studying. We got to keep writing, brothers. Right? That's what we have to do.
Any more questions?
Here's one right here from Brother Jeff.
This is a two-part question, for both of you. And the first part is for you, Sister Dove. The Afrocentric school, looking at the military occupation of Africa, the historical history of scientific racism that extends back to the 14th century, colonies, so many others. So we're in a particular period of time. How do we counteract what they already know is the most extreme danger that Carter G. Woodson identified so many years ago about controlling the mind? Who said that the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed? So those who control us, or those who try to control us, know that it is the mind that they need to attack. So how do we present Afrocentric schooling in a country that has very clearly, one party has said, we don't need much of teaching Black history from any perspective. From any perspective, and that's what we're gonna ride that for as long as we can for right now. Now, the question for you is, did you ever think about the individuals that they had you debating, the reason why they sent those individuals like Cornell to debate you?
She's first.
Well, I'm a strong advocate of we teaching our own children, that we're in charge of that. And I know that it's a very difficult time at the moment because many of the schools that were flourishing in the 70s and the 80s and 90s are now on the decline, because whenever there's something that's working, there's a new, there's a structure in place to undermine that. It's called, what is it called, Dr. Asante? About agency, when you stop the agency of people.
Oh yeah, it's the it's Tillerson's notion of agency reduction formation.
Agency reduction formation is what we call it, so that we can know that this is going to happen. But right now is a time that actually these schools are coming back. The mindset is there. There are changes in the air. There are things that we're doing now that we couldn't do before. So this is a good time to be claiming the truth that it's possible to begin these schools again. And there are 3 models in there. It can be in somebody's living room. It can be in an old building that one can get from, say a place like Philadelphia. Or it can be in a part-time school, just a Saturday school. Any of these forms change the minds of children immediately, because when they're confronted with truth and knowledge, they change, because it means something and they know that, and it's a change that happens. And so it's a very good timing, and we have to be in control. But the truth of the matter is that everyone needs to know this. Actually, not a black thing. It's a history of humanity, and that's why it's not published and available, because anyone can understand that. That's what Afrocentric theory is about, humanity. You see, it gives you a window to respect our ancestors and to develop our minds based on truth. And everybody needs to know truth. All people are being lied to, but the darker skinned people across the world are the ones who are being killed every day. So we have to do our small thing forever.
Thank you. Let's do it.
Okay, everyone, I'm really sorry to cut this short because it's so amazing that you're all here and we're so grateful for you. But Baba Asante and Mother Nadav would love to sign your books. And I see the owner over here, Mr. Ali, Dr. Ali, has something to say.
No, not doctor. I didn't work hard to get that. Since it's my own book, I'm going to talk. What I want to say is, my sister, my brother, thank you for blessing us with this spiritual presence here. We bring your years of struggle. I call my brother Asante a long distance runner.
Yes.
Because I've known people who dropped off the truck of struggle. The train goes on, the train still goes. People drop off, etc. So I want to just make sure that I personally, and I would represent also my wife Shirikiana, we both put some cover together. I want to say, welcome. It's your place. It's your house, and both of you will come back.
Yes.
We promise you'll come back.
Yes,
or
we will.
we have to bring them by carrying, sending some of our jumbo jet we own. And then I want to say a little bit about my sister. I'm just beginning to know what you're doing, but to me, independence in any endeavor you're in, to begin to put it in place is revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, independent publications of our own intellectual property, our own story,
Yes.
is the most long-lasting, long-distance struggle, in my view. You see all their books they left us, hoping that we will read someday. Those black people kept writing books, we have them. And I think for you to really be interested in getting these books accessible has touched me deeply.
Oh, that's great.
So I want you to know that is revolutionary. I'm not being a pope, I don't dispense this and that. That is, I just want to say. I'm sorry the Obama kid left,
Yes. Yes.
but I just wanted to say, yes, it's very important Africans to come, Africans to go. We can't predict the human transformation that takes place. It depends on individuals.
That's right.
I do not condemn. I'm glad I came to America because I found myself and my own father. And to a point, I'm making a film on the Ethiopian Italian War, 6 hours of it, because of my father, because of African Americans who stood with us.
Wow.
And so, for me, changes take place. It doesn't matter when, who comes where. But I also know the most dangerous program that took place is this whole idea of, from the Second World War, the United States, the new English empire, the British Empire mutated as an American empire,
That's right.
began to create black middle classes all over the world.
Yes.
And I think this is a class we have to scrutinize.
Yes.
I remember Kennedy bringing 400 Africans saying, for us, the battle is not only with weapon, but we also alter their thinking.
Yes.
Amen.
Yes.
And then I just want to say, genomically speaking, brought one, Obama's father, two, the brother from the UN,
Kofi Annan.
all this ended up serving
Yes.
the culture of imperialism, in my view.
Yes.
And so, Obama is genomically speaking, it doesn't matter where he comes from. Me, genomically, this American exceptionalism, creating African exceptional Africans, is what we're struggling with.
That's what.
And I'm sorry he left.
Yeah.
I don't know a single African war now
Yes.
in Congo or Cameroon where the African is fighting to own the diamond.
Yes.
I think we fight as mercenaries, we fight as the
Yes.
collaborators
Yes.
in order to enrich the white company, the
Yes,
major
we do.
white company. And the last I want to say to him, in case his friends are here to
Yes.
take to him,
Yes.
I think Cecil Rhodes and Livingston and all those missionaries that changed and altered our minds always said one thing: the day we make the African wear our shoes, our trousers, our pants, our clothes, the more we make him speak, alter his tongue, to make him speak not only our language, but think in our language, we got him.
We got it.
And I think we're trying to come out of that.
That's good.
So every work, all the contributions made here is towards unraveling that insidious colonial mindset.
Wow.
And I think the cultural component we've been talking here is very critical. For me, I think even some part of the militancy of the 1960s, 70s my brother. In my view, you have to also critically look at it and somehow understand some aspect of it is a John Wayne kind of a cowboy way of without understanding the pitfalls of black nationalism. In other words, we had black cowboys too.
That's right.
And what we do is sometimes when that collides, it disorients the struggle. But then again, I don't stop there because every disorientation period creates a clarity. And I think even the Liberation Front in Africa, you could be disillusioned. Mozambique, Angola, South Africa even now. I'm going 17 times. I'm very, disappointed. But the new will be born out of the contradictions.
It will happen.
We have to be around to celebrate that. And I think the best people who do is raising the issue of the cultural component of liberation. Because sometimes political science becomes just a deceptive artwork. But I think the cultural liberation is maybe what we are setting in motion. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. We're gonna sign books. Please come up and so that we can honor our Baba, Dr. Molefi, Asante, and Dr. Momana to sign your books.